Choices are the most powerful thing that we have. I think back to when I felt like I was stripped down to having absolutely nothing left. Nothing was familiar anymore. I didn't know, who I was. I didn't trust the world anymore. But I knew, all I really had, I realized was I had my character and I had my choices. And I realized that those were the only two things that I needed. I could remain myself and I could make choices to become exactly who I wanted to be. And choice after choice after choice, it's been those things that have mattered so much more than the fact that a boat exploded underneath me.
Hello, and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, where you'll hear conversations that generate one aha moment after another for you. There is an enormous wave of goodness and progress happening right now all around the world that most of us are not hearing nearly enough about. Yes, it is still an amazing world. And on this podcast, we'll introduce you to the people making it that way. And best of all, we're going to dig deep into the insights that they have developed to tackle some of the most vexing problems in our world. They know how to get around setback and make opportunity out of what would seem like obstacles to most of us. Today, we're going to interview an amazing woman who will help shed a light on how we make the best hand out of the cards we're dealt. I hope that this interview will inspire you to look beyond the momentary challenges that we have and see a landscape of possibility that you would never have noticed without Stefanie Schaffer's story and her amazing insights. Today with Stefanie, we're going to introduce you to a great young woman who's pulling back the curtain on the kind of perspectives we each can choose that will build lives of incredible possibility. We have a choice, and that's what Stefanie's story points out to the max for us. Steph is only 26, and she's already had an extraordinary life. She's been to the edge of life and almost crossed over to whatever's next. She was in a near fatal boating accident at age 22 while on a family vacation. And the doctors told her that her injuries were consistent with the way injuries look from war, with broken bones, amputations, brain and spinal injury. Her spirit was never broken. Well, near. And I'm sure that's what she's going to help us understand the difference, those momentary choices that we have that help us find that kind of insight we need to get through those kind of challenges. So today, Stefanie, welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast.
Thank you so much for having me again, Dr. Linda.
Well, I tell you, we talked to Stefanie about 2 years ago when her life was very, very different. And so was the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. We didn't even use video at that point. And I tell you, I was just having a quick conversation with Steph before we started. There were moments when Steph said things at the age of, what were you then, 24? That that come out of the mouths of people who have gained a lifetime of wisdom. So hopefully you can help us fast forward through some things and just help us all live better lives with the cards we've been dealt. I love that analogy, right?
Yes, I do too. I think it's, all about choice, not what you're dealt. And so I think the analogy is spot on for that.
Great. And I also want to mention, and we'll mention it again near the end to remind you that Steph has written a book called Without Any Warning: Casualties of a Caribbean Vacation. We're going to spend a few minutes here learning about Steph's story, and then we're going to get right to a whole bunch of other stories about what she learned and what we can take away and use every day. So, Steph, why don't you just, introduce yourself better than I have. Tell us just a little bit of where you are in the world, and then help us understand what happened to you.
Okay. I'm Stefanie. Like you said, we've known each other now, you and I, Dr. Linda, for a few years now. I feel like time has been flying by recently. But I'm 26 years old. I work in a lot of different fields at the moment, just figuring out, when an opportunity feels right. That's just what I've been doing, and having a life that has been beautiful and just one I never imagined as a result of that. So I do public speaking work. I just wrote the book you mentioned and have been promoting that through mostly in the New England region right now and just doing a lot of work with that. I've done some modeling work through the past few years, writing, speaking, all these cool new paths that have been presenting themselves before me. I still live in Vermont. I've been traveling a lot, just living this new life as someone that, I feel like a brand new person these years and just embracing that really fully.
Yeah. And, it would be hard to appreciate everything you just said unless you really know
Yeah.
when you keep referring to this new life. Yeah. Share with
Mhm.
us where you were and where you are now.
Yes. So those will seem more spectacular paths now when you hear where I was when I just a few years ago. So in 2018, I was a college student, 22 years old. I felt like I had my life really mapped out before me and like everything had really fallen into place. College graduation was right in sight. I had a dream internship lined up. I was living in this charming little apartment with longtime friends, and I really felt like I had the next few years all lined out. And then that summer, I went on a family vacation to the island of Exuma in the Bahamas. And we had 2 or 3 really perfect days there. It was me, my family, and a group of our friends. And we snorkeled and we kayaked and we did all of the things that you would picture on a Bahamian vacation.
Mhm.
And then we had gone there for one reason, which sounds so funny now when I explain it, because there's this tour on the island of Exuma called the Swimming Pigs of Exuma. And you go around the islands, and there's this remote, deserted little island that is only inhabited by wild pigs who live by themselves, lounge on their little beach, and swim in the ocean and entertain tourists that stop by. It was why we had gone there. And so we went out that morning and we got onto a boat. I walked on with my family. I very carefully chose my seat. I remember that most clearly of all of the day. Being 22, away from the New England region, I'm thinking I want to get the best suntan that I can get. So I chose my seat for that one reason. And I actually sat outside of my group a little bit. So my family was all a little bit away from me. And I was on a bench made for two, but it was just me sitting on that seat. And we took off, and our captain was, shouting behind us. And right away, I knew something was off because we were going very, very fast. And we were going up into the air and slamming back against the water. It wasn't a smooth boat ride like you would picture for a professional, highly marketed and promoted tour boat. It just wasn't what you pictured. And I remember being kind of terrified, holding onto my seat really tightly, thinking about just how embarrassing it was going to be if I fell from my seat. That was what I was worried about, was what people were going to think about me when I fell onto the floor. And it was only about 3 minutes into our trip when we went up in the air really high one more time. And that time, when we landed, the boat exploded directly beneath my seat, the seat that I had carefully chosen. I was thrown to the floor like I had been worried that I was going to. The memories sort of go pretty dark. I was somehow awake, but if you were to know how badly I was injured, we have no idea how I stayed awake that whole time. I was buried under a pile of debris, and people were thrown into the ocean. People were on the deck of the boat, and everybody was just really panicked. And it was actually my mom who had been thrown around and behind our boat, and she hit the water. She was really badly hurt herself, but she realized that she couldn't find me. And so she's screaming, just getting everybody's attention. And she's this 5 foot tall, very quiet person. And somehow she screams loud enough for over the sounds, what was going on, the wind, the ocean, everything. Somehow everybody heard her and they started looking for me. And it was actually 2 strangers who were on a boat behind me who then ran toward the flames instead of running away from them, as you would think that they would, and went onto my boat and picked me up and crazy thing is that was just my story kind of getting started.
So there was another boat that had taken off from the wharf just behind you. And those folks, those folks on that boat, pretty much many saw exactly what had happened.
Yes, exactly.
That is, the stranger part, we're going to get into the kindness of strangers, all that.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so two strangers risk their own lives, get on the boat, drag you off, then what?
Mm-hmm. So then I am floated back to shore. I am yelling for my mom. I'm very, very out of it, but somehow still awake and conscious and all of that. So we get to shore and there isn't any ambulance. So problem number 1 or 2 or whatever you want to call that one. But we knew there was no waiting. There was no time to wait. And so my family was applying limited first aid that they knew, tourniquets made out of straps of life vests, things like that. And they found a parked pickup truck in the nearby parking lot. And they didn't know who it belonged to, but they tossed out all of the belongings onto the ground. And when he came to his truck, they were like, you don't really have a choice. You have to drive us to the hospital. And so they put me in the bed of the pickup truck. My little sister, who was 13 years old, she sat next to me and she would not let me close my eyes and go to sleep because that was all that I wanted to do. But they knew that I wasn't going to wake up again if I did.
Now your legs had the major blood loss. This is where they were tourniqueting, yes. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they were tourniqueting my legs, both of them. They were very broken. My arms were both pretty bad shape as well. So we drove 30 minutes to the first hospital and we get there and we run into the next problem, which is that the doors were locked and there was no doctors inside. So they're banging on the doors and they get me inside, and my family and our friends were really the ones that were treating me the most, and they have no medical training. And so I was treated minimally there and then airlifted to a hospital in Nassau, Bahamas, where the very first surgery was the amputation of both of my legs.
Just below the knee, is that correct?
Yes, they started just below the knee, and then I've had a few revisions, so they've gotten shorter over the years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But like you said, that was just the beginning.
Yeah.
You had a spinal injury and a head injury and burns, and your mom, your mom, she was such an extraordinary spirit right beside you through the whole thing.
Yes. So she was for our family, she was hurt almost, pretty badly compared to me. She would be the next that was hurt just as severely. She had broken like 7 bones on impact. Both of her lungs had collapsed, things like that she couldn't even focus on at the time. She was just trying to get updates on me and things like that. So she was with me whenever she could be. And then she was actually airlifted separate. So by the time she got to that second hospital, she was told that my legs were already gone.
So I got goosebumps. I'm sure many of our listeners do. If you've got somebody in your life that you love as deeply as your mom must have loved you, these are unimaginable moments. Right. That, you both must have been saying, oh, this has got to be a nightmare. I got to wake up soon.
Yes. Yeah.
But, let's fast forward just a minute to give people a level of hope about where this story goes.
Yes.
So there's a few things that I have learned over the last decade of interviewing people who are changing the future for us all. And I've learned that most of them have this ability to be kinder than they need to be. And it's not the same as being kind. It's being kinder than the moment calls for. Like the 2 guys that saw the burning ship and jumped in and grabbed you, right? Like, take it from the beginning that when you landed in Nassau, then you got airlifted to Miami, was it? To
Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Take us through some moments, because you've obviously started this podcast by telling us all the wonder that you're having in your life right now. been through the kindness of one stranger after another who went the extra mile. Take us through some of those stories.
I mean, I think it started right away. I think I was surrounded by the right group of people for a moment like that, and not just the friends of our family who were crucial through those beginning moments, but the strangers. I said, we learned later on that right away, one of the responses of the islands, who I said there was such a minimal care at the hospital, that part is easy to focus on, but sometimes I'll forget that right away there was this post put out by a government official, I believe it was, of the island, who said, we have a United States tourist hurt very badly here. What you can do is you can go out and donate blood. And I don't know much about it, but I saw it years later, and I was really working on forgiveness at that point. And to see that, and to see, like, of course I didn't know how many people showed up, but to even think that maybe one person had shown us and donated blood, like, that saved my life. That is one of many things that saved my life. And I think about that was right away. And then the kindness the doctor tried to give my mom in the moment, and the nurse, of telling her that news that is impossible to understand how hard that must have been for her to hear, and someone who raised me my entire life, to think all of a sudden you're hearing her legs are gone and she wasn't there. To know that she had a little bit of kindness while she was alone in that moment, that gives me some peace. To know that then she had the same kindness given to her from the ICU nurses in Florida, who I was in the trauma ICU in a coma, and she was just the floor away, also in a trauma unit, because she was hurt. And usually patients on that floor aren't allowed out of their room or out of, like, the hall. And her nurses would make the extra effort to very carefully get her out of bed every single day so that she could go down and visit me in my room. And every time, there was a code blue or something announced, they would run into her room and they would see her shaking, and they would say, like, it's not her, she's still alive, she's okay. And so it's the hard moments, I think, where you really, really see the goodness of people.
Yeah, this is all around us now, in ordinary moments in a grocery store or what have you. I mean, in our everyday lives, we have these moments of choice when we could go a little bit extra for somebody else. And that little bit extra has made such a difference in your story.
Yes. All of the difference.
Yeah, all of the difference. So, okay, so tell us some of the moments that you remember that at the time your mind seemed to go the right direction. Like, you could have turned left with your way of thinking, but you turned right, and that led to a better outcome, and so on and so on and so on.
There are so many of those moments, I think. Some of them with a little bit of help from people, some guidance. And then I think it's almost like a practice. You get better at it every time. You learn to look at the bigger picture, and you learn to sort of not just see what's right in front of you, but you see, like, if I do this, this is going to get better. So I think it is something you practice and you get better. But at the beginning, I definitely needed some help. So the first one I would think of is my very first mandatory session with a psychiatrist. And I was in Boston. I was at that point very aware of everything that had happened to me. I had dealt with my legs not only being amputated, but they weren't healing. I was living in kidney failure, and I was going through the dialysis treatments that were torturous, making my hair fall out, making everything you don't want as a 22-year-old girl to happen. I had just been diagnosed with a spinal cord injury, a brain injury. I was doing speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and I was just angry at the world. And it was not like me. And so it might have been at the request of my mom, again, who knew I just needed a little help. And so a psychiatrist came in to see me, and it was just speaking aloud, I think, the feelings that I had that kept it. It wasn't just my problem alone anymore now. It was existing out in the open. And I was able to get a clearer head and think, all of this is terrible. There's no denying that. But I have to choose right now that it's either just going to be terrible or I'm going to take this day by day and work every day to get stronger. And I'm going to see where I can bring myself through this all. So I think that would be the first time that I had to choose. You're not going to wallow in your self-pity. You're not going to wallow in this. You're going to work every single day as hard as you possibly can. And you're going to make something of this story for yourself that is beneficial for yourself and your life.
So I want to leap forward from that comment you just made about what every 22-year-old girl would think was terrible. And
Yes.
can you just tell people the adventure you were on this summer or spring with is it the Kardashian photo shoot?
Yes. So that was a dream come true, right? A dream I never even thought to have for myself. I said I did a little modeling. I modeled for Kim Kardashian's Skims line, which I got the email and I was like, shocked. I was like, and then I saw the pictures and I saw they kept the pictures very natural, which I loved. They didn't do great, my scars weren't photoshopped. My body wasn't photoshopped. My legs, my prosthetics, the wheelchair, like they were in all the pictures. And I saw myself looking healthy and strong and like more confident than I had ever looked in my entire life. And I was like, I went from that, the hair falling out, the hating myself, to posing for a Kim Kardashian line photo shoot. It's
I
so
want you to you and I talked a month or so ago, and you told me, because I had seen my daughter is near your age, sent me these, were they Instagram photos of you in this glamour situation. And tell us just a little bit about how that transpired and how it felt and how the system works in that world.
Yes, I was approached by a talent agency that represents people with physical differences and disabilities. Every industry, I think, is getting so much more inclusive, which is beautiful and how it should be. But the disability community, probably our very biggest minority, hasn't been as highly represented. And so it's a big shift in that right now. And so I am very lucky that I am, young, and it happened at a time where that shift is happening. So I signed with the agency, and then it was my second shoot ever with Kim Kardashian's line. So I was very nervous, but they were great. I mean, they took accessibility into every consideration. They didn't just fly me out, they flew my mom out as someone to help me. They showed up with a wheelchair accessible van and driver to pick me up, a wheelchair accessible hotel room. And I'm thinking, this must be the first time they've ever had to do this. And they are thinking of everything. And we show up to the shoot, and there was 3 of us, and we were all in wheelchairs. And it was just the most amazing experience to think we're probably the very first. I mean, we were the first girls in wheelchairs used in her advertising. And it was just the coolest to share our stories with each other and to see that at one point we had all felt broken, and that here we were now doing this together, and we were learning from each other. And I think we were teaching a thing or two too, because the people on set we could see it happening, them getting more comfortable with our wheelchair. At first they wanted it was you have a caregiver for a reason, and then they're moving our chairs for us and they're asking us to pose, and we're showing them that ask us what you would like and we'll do it. We were showing that we can do anything that you would like us to do. And I think that was the best part of the day.
I love that. I think that whatever the traumas and dramas of the last maybe 5-10 years have brought, I think we're all getting a little bit more comfortable with those kind of awkward moments.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're crossing over that bridge of awkwardness faster and easier with each other. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely.
And I think that's as much on the community that has the disability. And let's just get this straight right off. Is there a more PC, more politically correct way to talk about folks that have amputations?
No, I mean, I know it's big right now. People trying to say like disability is not a bad word. You can say that we are disabled and it's not offensive, and people shouldn't feel uncomfortable, using that word. I think it's even taken me a big learning curve, I think, to try to learn what are the best terms. It was something I had never considered before. And then I was thrown into this new world, and it was me learning what I liked to hear and learning that other people have different preferences. And I think it's just talk to us like we're human, and you'll see our reactions.
Yes, I have a really good friend. We have a very good interview with Daniel Kish is one of the most famous blind folks in the world. He's the guy that sees the world with sonar. He's taught himself to make a clicking sound at the world. He lost his eyes when he was a baby. And for a long time in our friendship, I would get uncomfortable when I'd say, "Do you see what I mean?" Or, I'd use sight related references just as a part of speech. And I was very awkward. Then I'd catch myself and feel terribly awkward and all this. And it's a two-way street, this awkwardness, right?
Yeah.
To get
Mhm.
around it. It's as much about us at least being self-aware.
Yeah.
And it's about the person with the disability, knowing that there's no bad intention,
Yes. That
right?
is what I go by. For me, there's no certain term. There's something that's really offensive to me. What's offensive to me is when I'm not spoken to the same, or there's, a tone of their voice, or someone won't talk to me, they'll talk to the people around me. Like that is what will bother me. But there's no term, I don't think. And I think what you said is exactly right. It's just, if you can tell someone's being self-aware and they're doing their best, that's all that we can expect of people.
I totally agree. I've been a dentist my whole life, and my husband is also a dentist. And so I've lived with this crazy thing that I get that people say to me, if my husband and I are both at a dental meeting, let's say, they'll say, "Oh, are you his assistant?" And I've been living with that kind of sexism in my life since
Yeah.
whatever, in 90. And I used to get pretty hot about it.
Yeah.
And about 10 years ago, I decided to put everything through the lens of intention because we can pick up on, I believe we have antennas for bad intention.
Hmm. I do
And
too.
yeah, and so it was usually the men that did that to me, and I could tell had like some weird hang up and bad intention. Oh, I have my ways of working with them. But but I just relaxed into it, and just people that have good intention, we all are being awkward. But what I don't like in society is when we don't have conversations because we're afraid of the awkwardness.
Yes.
And back to your photo shoot, you said a bunch of things to me when you were telling me the story that made me think these folks had some awkwardness, but they got through it. They
Hmm.
they just you were there to do a job together, and it was all about not tiptoeing around, but just getting things said.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, like you said, for that, you're on a set, you've got a job to do, you've got pictures to get, you've got a timeline. You've got to just get through it, and you got to just address it. I think addressing it is most important. I think avoidance never does anybody any good, because then the awkwardness continues. You didn't learn anything. So ask a few questions, even if you think they're coming off wrong. Like, you'll see if they did come off wrong. And even from that, you will learn something, just from realizing, like, oh, that came off wrong. Like, it's all just a learning process with every uncomfortable conversation, no matter what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're getting there. I see progress, social progress about people just being honest and open and friendly and kind. You can see kindness in somebody's awkward moment too. And
Yeah.
so I love that. I just wanted to circle back to that as we get through the interview. We're going to take a break, and I'm going to introduce all the listeners to some wonderful things that are going on that they can have access to past this to help them meet more people just like you. So we'll take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue with a whole bunch of insights that Steph has for us. Dr. Linda here. If you are hoping the world is a lot better than what we see on the news and social media, and if you've been overwhelmed by the misery and negativity coming from the screens in your life, I've got a wonderful connection for you. What I've learned after almost a decade of curating the internet for insight and innovation is that there is an enormous wave of goodness and progress well underway in the world that almost no one knows about yet. And that's what led me to create this podcast. And then I co founded the Goodness Exchange. The Goodness Exchange is an amazing place on the internet now where you can enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of articles that give you a more complete, positive perspective about the state of the world. You can listen to exclusive bonus content from this podcast with our guests who are knee deep in solving some of the world's most vexing problems, and yet they still think the future is bright. We need to know what they know. And at the Goodness Exchange, you can explore a feed of exclusively good news and recommended other kinds of content created by the Goodness Exchange community. No one with good ideas and good intentions need feel alone again. You are right to hold out hope for humanity. Millions of people are out there creating a better world, and we have created a gathering place for all that wonder. Who knows what's possible now that there's a place on the internet created to bring out our best impulses and our collective genius. To explore the home for goodness on the internet, visit goodness-exchange.com/membership. Thanks. Okay, so we're back and we're talking to an amazing young woman, Stefanie Schaffer, about how we choose our perspective in some of the most difficult times in our lives, and those choices spiral out into unbelievable landscapes of possibility that we never thought we would have access to. So, Stefanie, there's a really important thought leader that we've interviewed here on the podcast named Dr. Sweetkumar Rao. RAO. If people want to look for that episode, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And he talks about a concept called good thing, bad thing, who knows? Like having life come at us, one thing after another, and really remaining steady about not labeling things good thing or bad thing, and just letting time evolve. So tell me how that strikes you in light of your experience.
I mean, I like that. I've never heard of that term that he's been talking about. So I mean, it makes me think about my whole experience over these 4 years. I think it would apply to a lot of moments that immediately seemed bad and ended up working out to benefit me. I mean, there is a lot of loss in my story and a lot of bad things. A life was lost. People went through a lot of pain that could have easily been avoided, but there's also so much good. So it's hard. I think it is important not to label something, not too early until you see where it actually brings you. Maybe in the moment it feels one way, and then years later you look back and think it was actually the opposite for you. Maybe it felt good and ended up being bad. Maybe it felt bad at the time and ended up bringing you somewhere really good. So I think that would be, something that applies to this whole thing.
Can you think of a moment like that in your story when something seemed outwardly dreadful that eventually changed over time?
I'm trying to think.
I think, the whole story you would probably...
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's the whole thing, Would I undo this? What happened now if I could? I mean, I would say no for myself personally. I would undo everybody else's pain if I could. I would undo the loss. I would undo that for my family and the other couple that was on the boat. I would do that for them. But for myself, I've grown so much that I've gained so much through this. The places I've gotten to go that have been a result of my injuries, like direct result. I spend months now, traveling every year. And a lot of it is for speaking, to tell my story, or to go for treatment or things like that. And I think the people I've met along the way, I wouldn't undo this for myself if I could. And that was early on too. I think about, I've told you, I've had about 44 surgeries maybe now. And even in those times where we were driving back and forth, my mom and I, to Mass General Hospital all the time. I think about that was a result of something bad. We were there literally I was there to have another surgery. But I think about the memories that we still look back on now, the nights and the precious, I think of time as like the most precious thing now because you really see how short and how much things can change. But I think the nights that I've gotten to spend just with my mom in Boston, or, the dinners that I've had with friends out there, there's so many memories that are so precious to me now that were a result of going there for surgery, so I don't label, you're right. I don't think you label something as good or bad. You're there for something that's hard, but you're having beautiful moments in the midst of it.
So this is the gist of it, isn't it? Like we have this choice. You said something very interesting in your previous interview. I listened to that. Again, I'm going to make sure this is in the show notes because Stef's first interview on this topic was lovely, and you'll want to follow this one with that. You said it is still a great world. It just depends on what you look for and surround yourself with.
Mm-hmm.
How does this, what you look for, how did that change?
Like I said, you'll learn to look further ahead, I think. And it's so much easier to focus on the bad. I think it's harder to look for the good. Like we're explaining that even that initial day, there's so much bad. It's an accident. It was preventable. It never should have happened. There was loss, there was pain, there was suffering, there was trauma, but there were strangers doing kind acts. And it took me a decent amount of time to be able to look that way, where it was so much easier for myself to only feel hatred and to feel anger. And it took, I think, more strength to look for reasons to find forgiveness and to see there was still so much good around me. And I think who you surround yourself with really does matter. I truly don't think, not just in that day, but throughout these years, those things I listed at the beginning of this interview, many of them would not have been possible without family, friends, my local community cheering me on, pushing me toward the next good thing. I think the people you surround yourself with, their perspectives can sort of get rubbed off on you. So it's important to pay attention to how they look at things as well.
Yes, yes. I had a 1-pound baby 25 years ago, and that's a whole story. And she lived. She's now an engineer. So that's the punchline of that. But what I recall really from those days, the 4 months in the intensive care unit, was the people you surround yourself with. This is really, really important. I think, and that's an opportunity that we have from the pandemic, is that we kind of get to fold back in or out or stay out of some relationships that were leaving us less than our best selves.
Yeah.
There were some doctors and folks that really brought out the best in you. I remember some of those great stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There were people that just believed in me, and before I believed in myself. And then, we've talked about this, but once I accepted really what had happened, I think I got my very stubborn and competitive edges back, which was crucial for me, I believe. And there were some doctors that believed in everything that I was saying, and not in just like a go with it type way, but it was like, yeah, if you put the work in, then I believe that this will happen too. And then there were other doctors that were like, no, this will never happen for you. And that was when it came to walking, which I can do now. But the amount of people who told me, you will never walk again. I'm like, first of all, I don't know. That drives me a little crazy. I'm like, who are you to tell someone? Unless you have a scientific, clear cut proof, it's just discouraging to tell someone very early on that something will never happen when, first of all, you haven't even seen what sort of effort they might be willing to put in. But there were so many people that just not just believed in me, but like really encouraged me and supported me and did everything that they could do. Like you said, being kinder than they even needed to be. Nurses who not just took care of me medically, but like we said, I went on vacation for 1 week, right? So we had our suitcase and that was it. And we spent 5 months in the hospital. So I had a nurse in Boston who would take my mom's laundry home to her house and would do her laundry for her. It was those little things that helped us to get through. And as a result, it was those people being kind that also really did it because they believed that there was something better waiting for us.
So that's another little thing that I've become committed to saying over and over again is just telling people, just do what you can do. A lot of times we think we just don't go forward with anything because we can't make a touchdown for the person. But the woman, I'm assuming it was a woman, the person who was doing your mom's laundry, and that was you mentioned it here, right? There was probably 1,000 cool things like that, but that's the one you mentioned. Now that woman, that's doing what you can do.
Yes, it is. It was the little things. I mean, those are huge. You don't have to do, like you said, you don't have to do the everything.
Yes.
But if you do small things, it can feel like everything to someone else. I mean, it might be everything they need in that moment.
In that moment. That is super, super lovely. So one of the things that I remember we talked about that I think you even have more perspective on now after 2 years is this notion of random choices and how they change outcomes. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. I mean, I am all about the power of our choices. At first, I was seeing them in a bad way. I was thinking if we had just chosen a different tour time, we had debated, do we want to go this day or do we want to go a different day? What if we had decided to go the day after and we just heard about this explosion on the news, Or I thought about how I had chosen that seat and that's where the explosion happened. I mean, I was given government documents that had my seat with a big circle drawn around it and labeled as the source of the explosion. So I thought that was because of my choice. I went through a phase in the hospital early on thinking, is this something that I deserved because I made maybe bad choices in my past? Like, is this something that happens to me because I did something to deserve it? You have all these different thoughts on choices, but I think of them much differently now. I think choices are the most powerful thing that we have. I think back to when I felt like I was stripped down to having absolutely nothing left. Nothing was familiar anymore. I didn't know, who I was. I didn't trust the world anymore. But I knew all I realized was I had my character and I had my choices. And I realized that those were the only two things that I needed. I could remain myself and I could make choices to become exactly who I wanted to be. And choice after choice after choice, it's been those things that have mattered so much more than the fact that a boat exploded underneath me. So.
Okay. And when I even was preparing to ask you this question, I wasn't sure if you were going to get some positive place out of it. But that is the gist of it, right? You wouldn't have wanted your sister to sit there or your mother.
No. And that was my first thought. And that is how I became okay. I think it was how I healed. It was how I was able to move on. I wrote about this in my book, and it's a line that stands out. It's something like, I took the brunt of all damage for my family, something like that. And that was how I chose to look at it, was I'm so sad for what I have lost. But what if it had been my mom? What if it had been my little sister? She has her whole entire life ahead of her. My mom held us all together. And I thought to it, like, yes, I chose that seat, but if I had known it was going to happen, I still would have chosen that seat, because there's no way I would have let anyone else sit there. I would have chosen it all over again, just knowing what was going to happen.
This is where we are in this world with so many things in our complicated lives, in our working lives, in our relationships with family members. It sounds like you were eventually able to kind of be the observer, look at what was going on as an outsider.
Mhm. I think in a hospital, when you're that broken, that's what happened. I mean, the stress that was put on my family from this was a lot. My mom's trying to take care of me while she's limping around my hotel hospital room. My sister is in school and driving to visit every weekend with my dad, who's at home taking care of her. My stepdad is going to work and driving to visit us after, and I'm not strong enough to sit up on my own yet, So you lay in this hospital bed and you look around. You can't do anything else but watch other people. It's the only way you can pass time when you're like that. It's all that you can do. And I think I was able to see how much people were doing for me. I was able to see the pain of others. I was able to have a lot of time to think and gain perspective.
Yeah. So one of the things you've mentioned that you've observed is that you've already said it, this could have been a story all about the loss, like the very worst thing that could ever happen to you, one big tragic story. But you've made it not about the loss. You just chosen to give your attention to the gains.
Mm-hmm.
This is it. Like what we give our attention to expands. Talk to me about stuff you're doing now that fits in that genre.
I mean, the book was what I devoted myself to for 2 years. And that ended up being a story of healing and love and a story about my family. Now I'm just focusing on where I want to go, who I want to become. I think I ask myself that all the time. I think now I remember to check in with myself and say, like, do I feel good about where I'm at? And if the answer is no, it's like, then what do I want to do? So I think you learn what's important to you and you keep those closest to you.
Also, do you have, as we wrap up here, do you have like aspirations that people can connect with? Like, how can people further your ability to chat? Because you give an amazing talk. I saw some of the earliest talks that Stef was giving that, seriously goosebump material through the whole thing. And she was young. She was just, I think when you and I met, you were just barely 23.
Probably. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I know you've grown in your public speaking abilities since then. How can people connect with your work or what do you want to amplify in the world, Stef? Like, what do you think you're uniquely built to contribute now?
I mean, what I love about this story is the lessons it's given me. I feel like I learned so much that I couldn't have learned without the pain, without, I always think it was like taking this really tough class and it gave you like the best education. That's how I feel when I think about my story now sometimes. And I think I learned these things. They've made my life so much better. And I just want to share them with as many people as possible and show that, that boat exploding is the least important part of my story. It's everything else. It's that which makes it relatable to everybody else too. And so I think, connecting with me through social media. I mean, I think my book I want to get it out to as many people as possible just to spread awareness of what I've learned. That would be, kind of a dream come true. It's just to keep connecting with new people.
All right, good. And people can see these lovely pictures of your modeling, your modeling expertise now. Where can they find those?
On my Instagram, which is where I'm most active and update the most often. So that is just my name, at Stefanie Schaffer. Facebook, we update sometimes, which is Stef Finds New Roads. And I have an author website and Facebook, again, just my name. So on every social and every website, it's conveniently labeled as just Stefanie Schaffer.
That's great. These are going to be great connections. We won't leave out anything in the show notes. You'll be able to find the things she mentioned and more. I want to wrap up. You've mentioned the word forgiveness a few times in this interview, and we haven't talked about that at all. I think that we're in a time here as we're coming out of the pandemic where things haven't gone our way. Folks around us, maybe coworkers, maybe family members, we are all struggling so hard that people have disappointed each other. There's so many things in people's lives and my patients' lives that I run into. I've had a broken leg and a broken arm, lost a feeling in my left hand. I've had a heck of a 2 years too. Everyone has a story. That's the first thing that the last half years has taught me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tell us, and so along the way, there are things that I'm going to be a lot healthier. I'm going to have a healthier mind if I forgive. Talk to us about forgiveness as we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with one thing, which is I had considered waiting to write the book. I kept saying to myself, wait until you've done something a bit more spectacular to write about. I was thinking of, something athletic, something of fame, something that deserves a book. But then I realized that living and healing, those can be the two most spectacular things you can do. And forgiving is the strongest thing I think that you can do. So I'm living a life that is true to myself. I've found forgiveness for people that I once thought I never would. I have healed, and mentally, physically, emotionally, I'm like, these are all spectacular things and they deserve a book being written about, and they will be relatable to everybody. So it's just been those things for me. But I think forgiveness is a choice for yourself. It's what will set you free from anger, and it's what allows you to really live the life that is best for you and nothing holding you back.
Because you could have had a lot of anger and, so much bitterness of the way this whole thing unfolded. The boat itself, that's where you
Yes.
could have held a lot. The boat drivers, the boat owners. There's
mistakes made that were all preventable. The boat was not safe to be on, and yet they were continuing tours. It was on every level of their government. There was a lot. And then we were ignored while trying to create change so it would never happen again. And so that required more forgiveness. We talked about the beautiful moments of the story, but there's also been tough moments within a family that are just hard with that stress and trauma. So it was all about us finding forgiveness daily for a long time.
Daily. Well, thanks for helping us wrap it up there, because most of the opportunities in the world to forgive and move on, they're hurting us more than they're hurting the other person. Is that somewhere in your reasoning?
Yes, definitely. They're not going to know if we've forgiven them or not. Only we know. And so it's not for the other person. It's for ourselves.
Right.
It doesn't. If they need forgiveness, usually they don't care if they have it or not. So you might as well just give it for yourself.
So good. So good. Just carry on and give your attention to what can make you have a better life.
Yes.
Well, Stef, thank you so much for this wonderful interview. As I've said so many times, I want you to spin right off into Stefanie's first interview with us, and you'll pick up a lot more of the stories. We tried very hard not to have the same interview twice, and they're very, very different. So have a great day and keep helping wherever you can. Keep doing what you can do, my dear.
Thank you so much. And you as well. It's always so great talking to you.
All right. So we hope that all the goodness and wonder and possibility that we talked about here today, that you can carry through another week and your life will be a better bright spot in somebody else's. Visit us at the Goodness Exchange. The Conspiracy of Goodness podcast is sponsored by and falls under the Goodness Exchange umbrella, where we're trying to make the world a better place, one idea, one kindness, one amazing piece of good news at a time. And there at the Goodness Exchange, you can start your day and end your day with people like Stef and great news stories that we're not hearing nearly enough about. It's a choice, like Stef said, of what we give our attention to. And I hope that you'll support the Goodness Exchange and join us there to make a better world. Thank you. Have a great day.